The first scene starts with a beautiful-looking nerd named Haruka fighting a huge masked man in an arena. We later find out that Haruka is our main protagonist's older sister. Haruka fights valiantly until the end when she is struck down unconscious in a pool of her own blood. Our setting is now set in Seidokan Academy. We meet our male protagonist, Ayato. A handkerchief falls from the window, so Ayato decides to jump up there to return it like any normal person would. Not surprisingly, he caught the occupant, Julius, our female protagonist, in the middle of putting on her clothes. To her credit, she doesn't freak out. She calmly tells him to turn around, finishes dressing, and asks him about the handkerchief. He tells her he found it, and she's so overcome with relief that she tears up. Ayato probably thought he was safe. But little does he know that Julius is bipolar. Although she was grateful for the handkerchief, Julius announces that she will kill him since he saw her naked and unleashes a fireball. Being the main character, he survives, so Julius challenges him to a duel. As you might expect, Ayato is much better than she expected. She can't take him out even when she unleashes her most powerful attacks. He counters, but instead of winning the match, Ayato knocks her down to save her from an arrow. He unintentionally grabs a watermelon on the way down. Fortunately for him, the chief representative of Seidokan Academy and student council president, Claudia Enfield, intervened. She declared the duel null and void because some paperwork held up Ayato officially being a student. Claudia pulls him away to finish his admittance. Claudia takes him to her office, where she explains how she expects him and all of the students to win in the yearly battles against the other 5 Genestella schools. This is apparently a problem for Seidokan, since the school's recent record is dismal. If he triumphs, Claudia tells him that he can have anything his heart desires. To which he replied that he's not really interested in that sort of thing. She reasonably asks him why he came to Asterisk, when we see a flashback of Ayato's sister and glowing chains. We find out later that Ayato's sister put a restricting spell on him since he is overpowered. The memory prompted him to ask Claudia what she knew about his sister, which turned out to be not much. No surprise when Ayato joins his class and finds his seats next to Julius. He tries to make up with her after class, but she shuts him down. Yubuki Aishiru, who was sitting behind Ayato and turns out to be his roommate, comforts him by saying that Julius keeps everyone at arm's length. He also tells Ayato that Julius is a real princess of Lysultania, a monarchy that's rising in power in Europe. As they're heading for the dorms, they come across Lester MacPhail, a very large and angry man, confronting Julius. Lester didn't take kindly to her dueling Ayato when she repeatedly turned Lester down. Julius responds that she has no interest in dueling Lester as she has already beaten him 3 times. The next episode begins with a flashback where Haruka is speaking with her little brother. She tells him his power is too great, and he'll need to find his purpose in life before he can responsibly use it. While in class, Ayato discovers that an old friend of his, Sasami Asaya, is a classmate, and she's attending school to help promote her father's weapons business. Ayato realizes he doesn't know his way around and asks Julius to show him around the campus. Julius agrees since she owes him one. Before they can leave, Claudia stops by to make sure Ayato doesn't forget about her. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Later, Ayato and Claudia go to claim Haruka's sword called Servaresta. It has been kept at the school since her disappearance. After Ayato is attacked by the sword, he convinces it to acknowledge him as its master. Ayato now has one of the most powerful swords in Asterisk. Claudia is turned on. Claudia then asks Ayato if he would mind coming to her dorm after. When he arrives, he finds her fresh out of the shower in a revealing robe. Ayato learns that top students have been dropping out of the Phoenix Festa, a major ranking competition, because they've been attacked and severely injured. Claudia wants him to stay by Julius's side to protect her from the same fate. Before he leaves, Claudia wishes to make a man out of Ayato. But as the male protagonist of an anime, he is not allowed to have any swag. The next day, Julius shows Ayato around the city. On their way home, they run into students from the Lu Wolf Academy dueling on an isolated street. Immediately, Julius realizes it's a trap. Without breaking a sweat, she flames the hoodlums into unconsciousness except for the leader, who explains they'd been hired by the man who he sees standing behind the tree line. Jules sprints after the man in the trees despite Ayato's warning, and she was barely able to avoid the ambush. Ayato reaches her in time to disrupt an attack from what turned out to be 3 assailants. Jules invites him back to her place. She innocently asks Ayato to take off his clothes. Ayato misunderstands her intent. She only wanted to repay him by repairing his clothes. Jules tells Ayato about her connection to an orphanage, and how she's fighting now to funnel her winnings to them so they can keep the orphanage going. The next day, Julie receives a letter and leaves immediately after school. Ayato thinks she's trying to keep her distance again, but Claudia, after hearing about the letter, says Jules is likely trying to keep him safe and uninvolved. After some thought, Ayato comes to an epiphany and states that he has finally found meaning in his life: to protect Jules from the horrors of this world. His resolve is clear. Jules arrives at the place designated in the letter. There, she discovers Silas Norman, one of the students at the school that we barely get introduced to before this encounter, who discloses that he was behind the attacks. Lester arrives, having been tricked into thinking Jules accepted his challenge, and discovers that Silas intends to kill both of them and make it look like it was Lester was behind the assaults. Silas unleashes dozens and dozens of his combat dolls against them. Lester falls quickly. The more powerful Jules fares better, but sheer numbers begin to wear her down. Just as Silas and his puppets were about to kill her, our hero arrives just on time. He confesses to her that he knows his purpose in life is to protect her. Silas rudely interrupts the awkward moment. Carrying Jules all the while, Ayato defends until he figures out Silas' patterns. Moments later, he demolishes the puppet army.
Second sword! Nine fangs!
When Silas tries to escape using a flying puppet, Jules lifts the 2 of them after Silas, since she can fly and Ayato can't. They knock Silas out of the sky, and he falls where Claudia shows up out of nowhere. The chains that bind Ayato strike again before the 2 of them can land. After he passes out, we learn that his sister had placed a restriction on his user of power just before she left. He is only able to use his power for 5 minutes. He awakens to find his head pillowed on Jules' lap, and they share a touching conversation. After some flirting, they decide to team up for the Phoenix Festa. The scene switches to Claudia as she catches up with Silas and nearly kills him. At the very end, we find out that the Alicant student who created Silas' puppets was watching the whole affair, and that events are following her plan. The next episode starts with Claudia representing Seidukan at a meeting with the other schools. Those academies include Le Wolf, Alicant, Gelon, and Garrardworth. At that meeting, we find out a little bit about what Claudia was hoping to achieve in the last episode: cooperation on a new weapon between Seidukan and Alicant. The scene shifts to Ayato, who's rushing because he's late for a meeting with Jules, his partner for the upcoming festa. In his rush, he runs into Tudukirin, who is only a 12-year-old girl with a huge rack. A mean man interrupts and she immediately apologizes to the mean one and runs off with him. Jules was angry that Ayato was a little late and decided to channel that anger into their practice. She almost beat him, but he withstood a withering attack in the last second of the fight. After they discuss their strategy for the festa, she warns him not to get involved in any unnecessary duels. She doesn't want anyone to see what kind of moves he has. Claudia arrives with Ernesta Kuhn and Camilla Pareto from Alicant, who are the engineers from Alicant who will work on the new weapon with Seidukan. Ernesta lets slip that the puppets Ayato destroyed were her creation. She whispers to him that he won't be so lucky next time, then flirtatiously kisses him on the cheek. Jules is not amused. Later, Ayato is discussing Alicant's research teams with his friend Aishiru when he hears a slap. Tudukuchiro, Kirin's uncle, slapped her for disagreeing with him. When she tried to protest, Ayato intervened. The uncle promised never to get violent with Kirin again if Ayato beat her in a duel. She tells him to decline the duel and walk away. But our main protagonist says he can't leave a girl hanging like that after seeing what her uncle did. She thanks him, but still says she can't afford to lose. They begin the duel. Jules shows up and Aishiru tells her that Ayato is fighting the nicknamed Lightning Speedblade. We subsequently find out that Kirin is actually the #1 rank in their school. Throughout the duel, Ayato seemed to constantly be on the defensive and eventually loses from time expiration. Next we see Julius fling a washcloth onto Ayato's head. Julius mentions that since Kirin destroyed his student badge, Ayato needs to meet with Claudia to get a replacement. Claudia tells Ayato that Kirin's uncle, also known as the Woman Beater, is a big-shot recruiter for Seidukan Academy. He's not an executive yet, but he's using Kirin to propel himself onto the board. Claudia then reveals that having a highly energetic sense of self-interest is self-defeating at Integrated Enterprise Foundation, and that it is very unlikely for the Woman Beater to ever achieve his ambitions. She knows so much about it because her mom is one of the executives. As he's returning to his dorm, Ayato is surprised to see Kirin. She wants to thank him for trying to help her. As he walks her back to her dorm, they begin talking about different sword techniques and, unsurprising, find they share a common interest. They decide to train without Julius every morning. Ayato drops Kirin off at the gate to her dorm just as Saya drops out of a tree and almost strangles him. She asks him again to be her partner, but he says he can't abandon Julius. Speaking of Julius, she confronts him at lunch to find out why he's been training with Kirin. She's relieved that he seems to view it as no more than basic practice and nothing more. As they're on their morning run, miniature dragons attack Kirin and Ayato. They repel the attack and find that the dragons regenerate severed limbs. Fortunately, Kirin discovered that if they cut the dragons into small enough pieces, they can find the core, which, when destroyed, finally kills the beasts. The remaining dragons run away. Ayato realizes that because Kirin found a core, the beasts are synthetic and are therefore from Alicant. The dragons regroup and counterattack. As he's dodging, Ayato feels the pavement cave in beneath him. Kirin manages to grab his wrist before he disappears, but the edge collapses, and they both plunge into darkness. Ayato and Kirin, having fallen into the storm sewer after the pavement collapsed, surface uninjured thanks to a bed of water. Suddenly, a bigger version of the dragon attacks. Ayato unchains himself to withstand the first attack. He's able to slash the monster in half and luckily destroys its core. Unfortunately, he has to pay the price for unchaining his power, and he passes out. When he comes to, they hang their clothes up to dry and spend some time back to back, bonding. She discloses to him that her father is in jail because he killed a man to protect her from assault when she was 8 years old. Since he was a Genestella, he was imprisoned. Kirin holds herself responsible and so is trying to gain influence at the school to get him released. She mentions that her uncle, despite the unfair treatments, is helping her to the fastest means possible to achieve this goal. Using his own experience, our protagonist helps her see that choosing her own way will be better for herself and her dad. Shortly thereafter, rescuers find them. Kirin confronts the Woman Beater and tells him she's going to choose her own way. The Woman Beater tells Kirin to stay away from Ayato. When Kirin refuses, the Woman Beater beats again. This time, however, Kirin only allows it once. She thanks him for his previous help and departs to start down her own path. As her first autonomous act, she decides to challenge Ayato in a duel. Ayato decides not to use Servaresta as it is too slow to Kirin's quick swordplay. She unleashes one of her most powerful techniques, and he switches weapons to a spear. She counters, and he switches weapons again. Kirin counters yet again, and he allows her to disarm him so he can use a grappling technique. That proved to be his winning move. Ayato is now the #1 ranked student in Seidukan. At the end, Saya approaches Kirin and says it's admirable that Kirin's fighting for her father. Saya then asks if they can be partners for the festa and Kirin agrees. The next day, Kirin and Saya are seen practicing. Individually, they're great. As a team, though, they literally stumble over each other. At lunch, they discuss their situation with Ayato and Julius. With Ayato's help, Saya and Kirin realize they need to focus on their teamwork, especially since the both of them had been strong solo players for so long. Saya decides she and Kirin will socialize tomorrow. After some scenes shopping and getting to know each other, Saya asks Kirin what she would like to do. Kirin randomly asks Saya to teach her to swim. They head to a public pool. As she's learning to kick, Kirin confesses that she wants to learn to swim so she will improve the chances Ayato will see her in a somewhat favorable light. While practicing, Kirin bumps into another student with a big rack and an undersized bikini on. Kirin apologizes, but the other student refuses to accept the apology. Then she tries to backpedal until she finds out that Kirin can't swim, at which time the student taunts her. Saya reached the end of her patience and, from the edge of the pool, throws a flotation device at her. "Please stop mocking my partner," Saya says. The student finds out Saya is unranked, so after introducing herself as Violet Weinberg of Queenvale Girls Academy, she challenges Saya to a duel. Violet tries to make a showy start, but Saya just summons her weapon and fires. The duel is over about a second after it started. At the end of the day, as the sun sets, they sit by the pool and reflect on the day. Sada tells Kirin to stick up for herself more. The scene ends with a feeling that the two accomplished their goal for the day. The next day during practice, they are completely in sync. Julius and Ayato decide they might fall behind if they don't practice. That concludes 8 episodes of the 24. Next will be the tournament arc where the festa begins. Please make sure to like and subscribe if you like the content and stay tuned for the next video.